So I want to bring in another conversation with all of you, and I want you to be involved. So I have with me Gavin McKelvey, who's the Chief Marketing Officer from Identity Automation. There you are. This is awesome. I'm going to go back to my other screen, and I'm probably going to share another screen from our survey that we did that Identity Automation sponsored. But Identity Automation, the reason we're having this conversation is because there's something new now happening in schools all across the country, having to do with the sheer level of things they have to have access to, and what that means for the teacher workload and the school's ability to actually get to real personalization. So Gavin, let me just say this, and then let me have you define it. Identity in most systems is a roster. And we all know in schools like what rosters look like. Rosters look like, name, class, they're supposed to be in, grade, what assignment. But they're not embedded with more identity, so that the identity of that individual in interacting with systems is already pre-tagged for maybe their learning preferences or their special needs, so that in the interaction with the systems, they're getting the best recommendations for what to use next and so forth. So what we're talking about is a new level of providing things to students that has to do with the identity being infused into that individual package of who is this student. Am I saying that right? And when I'm talking about identity infused education?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. Great to be with you all. And yeah, I think that's a great lead in, Lonnie. The way I think about identity infused education is this. It's really raising the expectations that we have about what the IT infrastructure and processes can do to do a couple things. And I love the fact that you brought up, Lonnie, this that phrase, freeing up teachers to be human. I think we're all very well aware of I call it corrupt time, whether it's someone in the office, whether it's a teacher having to do manual effort of grade entry or anything that distracts from time with students I call it corrupt time. And on top of that, we have a lot of processes that make it really hard to tailor any aspect of the educational process to the individual needs of a student. So the challenge I think we all face that is, I think, embodied in this phrase of identity infused education is, how can we center an IT strategy on the identity of actually everyone who is in the educational process, from not just students and teachers, but even parents and staff, to automate processes and tailor all aspects of how school works, so that student outcomes can be maximized. And even in the short run, I think that even though we're talking about a fairly grandiose vision when we think about this, there are near-term drivers around maximizing instructional time that aren't, even though they're visionary, they're immediately beneficial as well. So one thing I want to caution everyone about when we talk about identity infused education, it's both something that can lead to a bigger, grander long-term vision, but there's also a roadmap to get there. So it's not like we have to wait 10 years to realize benefits from this stuff.
Yeah, this is immediate, and it's already happening in other industries. Okay, so do you mind if I share some of those slides out of what happened when we were asking about identity infused automation? Should I do that?
Which you mean from your content? Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just share those. Okay. So what you're looking at is the pile of responses that we took in. That a lot of teachers responded. We kind of wanted that because this is about teaching.
Hey, Lonnie, we're seeing the presenter view, not the other view.
Oh, let me do that over again. There we go. Thanks for catching that, because I hard to tell sometimes in Zoom. Okay, so you're seeing the top line data. with the school. Do you see that? It says 33 to 42% students. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So this is just the top line data that we pulled off of this. So we started out last year saying there's something going on, right? Before we entered the pandemic, 27% of the United States population of kids had left traditional public. A lot, some of that was charters, right? I showed those slides before, which are still public. So, it's like fishy numbers for people in state governments. But now, when you include charters, we're somewhere between 33 and 42%. The last study showed the average loss, non-re-enrollment by traditional schools in America is 15%. It's not 3.6%. That is huge. So you have also 35% of students not showing up online. You have 20% of the remainers who are, even if you're coming back to physical schooling, there's 20% that don't want to be coming back. They still want to be affiliated with your school or district, but they don't want to come back. And then 51% have losses in achievement. So when I think about identity automation, I'm looking at the numbers not showing up online for why you have to move your sophistication of how you express student identity interrelational to your delivering bits of knowledge and education, because that's the move towards personalization. If you can personalize learning, that's the expectation right now. That's what you're getting outside in the consumer world. Every time you go shopping, recommendations engines start pelting you with what to buy, right? We're not doing that in education. Everything goes through the teacher, too much work on the teacher, and the heavy lifting of using that student's identity to deliver and execute on value, personalization, is kind of weak. So I think these numbers are really compelling, like really compelling, why something has to happen with this. So why don't you give me your take on all of that and go a little bit deeper into why identity automation in education is necessary, having been born out of what's already going on in a lot of other markets.
Yeah. So I think we'd all probably admit that there's lots of drivers to these numbers, but one of the big ones, to some more than others here, is that there's a lot of friction in the process of leveraging technology in the process of learning, and especially in a forced remote environment, especially when it's thrust upon us in an unpredictable fashion. There's a lot of change management that's not really possible. But in order to have a fighting chance, any district to have a fighting chance at having an agile model, or an agile enough model to deal with uncertainty, number one, like what we experienced last year. But secondly, in order to rethink delivery models of education, and I'll give you an example of one that I use a lot in discussions like this is, we're all familiar with the sort of the rigid model that I'm a product of public schools, and very familiar with the traditional approach as a student as well. But we're dealing with a very complicated world. And let's say there's an inner city student who is an adolescent, and a single mother working multiple jobs, no other sort of parent around, but there's also a child who's maybe 4 years old, not entered school. Someone's got to be home. Sometimes it's that adolescent that's got to both try some way to learn and also care for their younger brother or sister. How do we get school to that child? Because getting that child to school may not be an option. That is a real situation that's part of the numbers. And what I like about this idea of identity infused education is it starts to get us to think about how we can, as I said before, put identity at the center of the IT strategy, so that we can start thinking about more agile models that incorporate those corner cases or difficult to reach cases. And the cornerstone of putting identity at the center of an IT strategy is a capability that's actually alive today. It's called identity management. It's what's used for things like automating provisioning of access to applications, on day one or hour one in many cases. I'm not sure if everyone's run into this, but I bet you have if you don't have a service like this in place right now. Sometimes it can take days to get access to everything you need as either a staff member or sometimes even a student. Provisioning is a capability enabled by identity management that automates provisioning of everything you need to have access to do whatever it is you're trying to do, whether it's learn or do your job. That is alive and well today and an example of what we're talking about, but the possibilities go so much farther than that. And as Lonnie's just mentioned, the possibilities of personalizing and tailoring education so that it's more responsive to either getting grade level appropriate curriculum on the fly to the student, culturally responsive curriculum, or even performance responsive curriculum. These are all things that become much more possible when identity management is in place. And that's what I also like about this opportunity is we don't just have to dream of a bigger and better way to deliver education. There are very real outcomes that can be driven with this technology immediately.
Yeah. And I like what you also said about like, we're in a structural shift. Like everyone that's on these webinars with us, as we're sort of rolling through different areas of the country, they're saying normal's not coming back. But the definition of where structure has to go is kind of not all there. And so I just say it, the teacher's job has changed. Well, everyone knows that. They haven't really defined how the teacher's job changed, because maybe they're still trying to do like the full school day on Zoom meetings, right? Which didn't work anywhere. And if it did, it was a miracle. So how are they embedding technology? How are they doing some asynchronous learning with technology and logging into Achieve and whatever, some of the other companies that are out there like Scholastic and all those? What are they doing with that? And that sort of takes the load off. But it still is putting everything through the teacher. So identity could allow sort of like, what's the right word to say it, Gavin? The individual to interact with learning as a sovereign, right?
Yes.
Remember you mentioned to me one time, sovereign identity. This is what the other markets are already doing, like for healthcare and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a couple things. First, I would say, to do the kinds of things that we're talking about, that incredibly responsive approach to tailoring on the fly, frankly, learning plan and freeing up the time of teachers to spend more time one-on-one or with the class, and striking the right balance between student-led learning through tools versus more classroom time and teacher time. All of that has to be enabled with identity management. What identity management, part of what it does is it collects attributes to a person. I think we can all appreciate the idea that we live a huge portion of our lives online, and some companies have made a living capturing our data, and they personalize things like ads to us. That's a useful analog, I think, for what I'm talking about. Although we're not trying to serve ads, we're trying to collect this data so that we can really understand what's actually happening with this student, so that we can the IT infrastructure, so that the tools can be more responsive to what's actually happening. Then it also enables incredibly insightful analytics to look at cohorts. You might look at cohorts by demographics, by neighborhood, by all kinds of things that help those who are responsible for student outcomes continually innovate their approach to delivering learning to their constituents. And then the last step that goes even beyond those things that are extremely real today is, as Lonnie, you brought up a couple times now, self-sovereign identity, which is another up and coming emerging technology that actually has use cases that go way beyond education. But what I see as just an incredible use case for that technology blended with some of the technologies that have been around a little longer is helping create the visibility and agility. I'm using some kind of buzzwords here, but allowing us to completely reinvent in many ways the way education is delivered, because as self-sovereign identity becomes more real time, more part of real life, students can really own their path, and we can deliver new things that were not necessarily possible or practical in the past. One example, this may not be the best example, but one example that has been real is allowing a teenager to, as part of their PE credit, mow lawns of senior citizens. But the collection of something like that that's outside the scope of a normal traditional education requires IT to do some things that aren't necessarily part of a standard toolkit for IT. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Those are just some examples.
I think, if people are understanding a little bit what's going on in the badging market, badges are emerging as like these independent places that issue, and also students can maintain their own sort of set of badges, certificates, degrees, diplomas, all that stuff. That's an emerging thing, right? And it's built on the same concept that you're talking about, which is, let's let the individuals be sovereign over their own stuff rather than like charge them for every time we issue a transcript. And then they don't go to college because it's a $200 ping every time they ask for their transcript to be mailed somewhere. Why are we doing that? We have blockchain, so what's happening? So this whole idea of sovereign identity is it's not only coming to education, it's already really strongly getting traction in the healthcare market. Am I right?
Yeah, and financial services, pretty much every industry is going to be touched in a pretty significant way. In fact, financial services being disrupted immediately. But I think the opportunity in education is just amazing. We're probably seeing probably the most practical and real use cases with self-sovereign identity, I would say, around verification of credentials. So I know I've had employees that have claimed certain security certifications that I have a choice. I can look at their resume and see if, and just take their word for it, or I can validate it. And that's an example of one of the use cases that is actually alive and well today, validating credentials. But where in a K-12 environment, I think the best use cases are the ones that will drive more automated personalization of learning plans, as an example, and serving up to the teacher recommendations for tailoring, either identifying students who need help or tailoring lesson plans that for the student, and allowing the teacher to do more effectively because they're freed up. And I love that term, that phrase you used, Lonnie, earlier.
Yeah, well, this is my main concern, is that we're breaking our teacher. So the same study we were just showing before is 74% of teachers are citing they're overwhelmed or burnt out. 74%. So that's not going to work. And since we all are kind of in agreement, normal's not coming back. We're now in digital now for real. When we do have buildings open, teachers are still going to be delivering and executing through the machine the issuance of all the stuff, right? They're not going to be handing out as much paper. There's still a little bit of paper being purchased in the market, some books, but we've moved. So this idea of how do we take the workload off is a major theme with me. Like, how do we save the teachers? Some of them don't recognize what's really happening in terms of their overall workload. I'd be surprised if there are that many of them that haven't recognized it yet, but it's real. The pain is real. And what we're talking about here is leaders. Let's talk about how you're structuring the function of your technology structure, your architecture behind the scenes, so that the identity becomes its own sort of floating avatar in all your systems that works for you.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think is important to consider as well when we go when we sort of rethink the future of education is, I think, we all want to break the mold. I think I'm even sensing some of that in the chat, right? Normal wasn't really working for anyone anyways, as Anne said. I think we've got this window of opportunity where, because of the change that was thrust upon us, there's sort of an appetite for change. And I think it's so important to seize that.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's just say also, and I can't wait to hear from some of the educators later on about this today. There's a huge amount of money in the market right now. There's never been a better time to go, look, let's redo the way we're structured, right? How our workloads flow and what we're using to execute on knowledge around the learner and then to the teacher so that things are customized. The first CARES Act, still all the money isn't spent. A lot of states and districts, they got extensions. And then the second CARES Act came in, 4 times the size for K-12. Last year, the market upticked by $7.5 billion in spend in K-12 on EdTech. Now we got a second one that's just coming into the market now that's 4 times the size. Yes, some of it's going to be for PPE and safety, but my bet is that 50% or more will be EdTech, just like the last one. And we might even get a third stimulus this year, which is blowing my mind. Now's the time to have these deep level conversations about what are you doing for people? Are you going to be competitive and relevant around that individual, personalizing for that student so that when you go out to the parents in your community, you're like, look, we're like amazing. Look at this stuff we're doing for your children. And they're like, I'm going to not homeschool. I'm going to go to your school. I think that's what we're really talking about. It comes down to those little simplicities, like really hard technology sophistication is going to be awesome so that you can say this. Do you think there's some more practical things to say about what could be done with personalization than what we've said so far, Gavin?
Yeah, I think personalization is the thing that is that's the chasm to cross, right? I think the more practical aspects of identity management that plant the seeds of identity infused education and lead to personalization are really getting that provisioning use case is the one I mentioned earlier about getting people anyone that comes into the educational process, if it's someone in food services or a teacher or a student, getting them access immediately to what they need. That's a very real use case today that has payback immediately in terms of experiential benefits of getting people productive immediately, but also operational benefits and cost savings. So you were talking about funding. I think that's a use case that actually doesn't even require new funding. So anyone who's dealing with funding challenges today, you can immediately get benefits from that. But most importantly, it lays the groundwork for the promise of identity infused education and the personalization that you're talking about. Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say, and the vision that we have been talking about, the responsive aspects of more tailored and personalized education can't happen in a real meaningful, scalable, automated way without identity management.
Yeah, and just to anchor what you're saying, I pulled up this slide that Chris is going to talk a little bit more about later. This is the updated architecture slide that shows the entire savanna, so to speak, of things that schools are dealing with in general, right? In buckets. So the bucket in blue up there at the top, sovereign identity rostering, this platform, it's a software platform, right? That interacts through integrations with a lot of other stuff. Do you want to go deeper into that to make sure we explain it? And then we should ask everybody to, ask their questions.
Yeah, sure. So the way identity automation looks at these capabilities very simply in our portfolio, even we have single sign-on, which I'm assuming everyone's familiar with, the ability to manage logins easily, so you're not dealing with 10 kids out of 25 who have lost their password, and then you lose half the class trying to figure all that stuff out. Rostering, what I've been calling provisioning or identity management more broadly, and then analytics. All of that is, those are the capabilities that are represented in the blue box. That's all for us part of a single platform that someone may acquire from us that again starts to lay that groundwork and help with this hybrid model that's described here. All of it connects to the software systems on the bottom, from SIS to LMS, and I'm looking for HRMS as well. But because my personal passion in this area is some people, some of our competitors even focus just on what's happening between the student and the teacher. Our philosophy is more holistic. The entire organization, the entire machine has to become more efficient, more agile, more responsive to the outcomes we're seeking. That means driving automation and a better experience for everyone in staff, whether you're talking about food services or the office or administration. Everyone can benefit in their job to be more productive, to ultimately lead to better student outcomes. I'm off my pulpit now.
Yeah, and I want people to ask questions, because I think what we're talking about, you just mentioned SSO, which for us is the other box, the access management. So you're riding the rail between those two, identity management, access management, but in the direction of doing those things that are way over on the right, which is being able to automate auto cohorting, auto distribution, other automaticities that are not resident in most systems right now. I mean, in other words, the nirvana of what we're talking about hasn't even come close in most places in the country, and the overburdening on the teachers, therefore, is huge. It's sort of the next mountain for all the administrators on the line having to climb.
Final comments. I know you want to open it up to some questions here. I think that's one takeaway I would just recommend, is that if anyone who's thinking about single sign-on, don't only think about single sign-on. That's simply an extension of a really robust identity management solution. And I would encourage everyone to think really holistically about how can we automate and simplify all of the tasks that we can to make the entire organization and machine, if you will, work more efficiently. And single sign-on is just one aspect of it.
Yeah. Okay, so we want to open it up for questions. We have a few minutes here, and I want to make sure, I'm hearing from your comments, and even if you're like, what are they talking about? I don't get it. Why is that relevant to me? I want to hear from you. I want you guys to feel like you're all involved in this conversation about what we're talking about. I know you come to the Learning Council because we give a lot of data and we talk about forward-leaning things, as well as heartfelt things like what's going on with the grief in the market right now. How are we going to motivate students? We're all over the place, but I want to hear, kind of what's going through your mind right now when we talk about this next level to where things are going. So Gavin and I are watching and waiting for you to comment and question or chat. This is the pregnant pause, Gavin.
That's right.
Yeah.
If we just keep filling the vacuum, then no one else will talk, right?
This is what teachers are doing successfully online. They just stop talking and wait for people to finally raise their hand. Yeah. Heather, can you unmute? And I think you just sent me something, but can you unmute, Heather Sherburne?
Oops, I can unmute. And
yes,
I sent you when I did copy and paste, it pasted the wrong thing. Darn technology. But my question was really a comment to say that the type of integration that's being talked about is with students and staff and all the various platforms, along with security of all of that data and information, is a huge time suck for, and a huge problem that we're dealing with and wrestling with on a daily basis. And certainly single sign-on has some real pros to it, but it doesn't work for everything. integrating with your SIS works to some extent, but it doesn't work when you are needing to make a change and it syncs overnight. So the student doesn't have access today. If you try and make it sync because you're changing your classes and moving a student the day early so they can have access tomorrow, now your attendance doesn't work. And it's like the integration of all of this is, a huge frustration. And you know that my district has quite a bit of technology. And I just think it is absurd that we have not found a way to manage this in education. So it's been really interesting listening to the comments.
Yeah, the one of the biggest challenges that the industry faces is interoperability of all the applications that we buy and the data ultimately that is in them. And there are a couple different approaches to interoperability and connecting these systems. A typical approach that a software or a SaaS, if everyone's familiar with that term, a software as a service company will take is just connect to most of them and be as efficient as possible. I think one of the advantages to the approach we take is that we not only have standard connections to all of those the main applications, we actually can connect to and build connections to just about any application that someone might bring to us. That helps solve a lot of what you're talking about. But the other one that I would say is a lot of the services out there don't connect to the HRMS, which ignores a huge portion of the people who are contributing to the learning process, even if they're behind the scenes. And again, that's why I say we in terms of the IT strategy and what providers like Identity Automation need to do, and that's what we do, is think more broadly about the entire organization, not just what is paramount, frankly, but still not the only thing that's important. That learning process between student and teacher, we have to care for how the entire organization is supported with these kind of capabilities.
Absolutely. If I could just add to that thing, because so we were counting in California, we have CalPADS, which is our main statewide student database that controls everything. But there's also a special ed version of that has to integrate called SACE. And then now there's an HR one called CalSAS that is controlling all of the HR personnel credentialing pieces of it. And in trying to wrangle through some of this, we were counting how many people had to touch entering an employee's data, and it interacts with all of these different systems. And we had like 11 different people entering data and saying, well, is it any wonder that we have dirty data in the system when you are having so many people touch it to enter various aspects of it, whether it's their personal information, it's their assignment information, it's their step and call and pay information, it's their tax information, it's their student roster information that's connecting to them, it's their courseware that needs to align with them. It's just crazy. So I agree with you 100%, trying to get something that can make those things talk together at the district level, because we have enough problems then trying to make it connect to these three huge platforms that interact for auditing purposes for the state of California on top of it.
Yeah,
it
sounds like Gavin and I need to call on the state of California and beat them up for you, Heather.
Please do.
Yeah. Well, I live in Sacramento, so there's no reason that I don't have an excuse. I can just go down there.
Well, and I understand what they're trying to do, but it is incredibly difficult and challenging for a district who's trying to focus on educating kids to manage and navigate all of this. It's a lot of manpower.
Yeah, 11 people in a district your size is ridiculous. I mean, we love them all, right? You don't, but
right.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of pieces and parts moving.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to have us share a video really quickly, take a little break here. Thank you so much, Gavin. Thank you, Heather. And thanks everyone else who are participating in this particular part.